The field is ours, but at what cost? The price of victory is always steep.
We attack from the east, here. And the western flank? Covered. The cavalry will swing around. Agreed.
Subutai's double envelopment at Mohi. Catapults bombard the bridge as Batu Khan's cavalry charges. Ögedei Khan's death in Karakorum forced the Mongol withdrawal.
Hi guys, you almost weren't born. Not you specifically, none of us. Western civilization. It almost ended in 1241. 3 days, 3 battlefields, 100,000 dead. And the only reason you're hearing this story right now, in English, in the world, you know, is because one man thousands of miles away drank himself to death at exactly the right moment. This is the story of how close we came to living in a completely different world. A world where Europe fell, where the Renaissance never happened, where everything you know just didn't exist. Welcome to Sleepless History, friend. Get comfortable. This is going to change how you see history forever. Close your eyes and transport yourself to a cold spring morning in 1241. Something in Europe is about to change forever, but no one knows it yet. The calm before the storm. Duke Henry II of Silesia stood at his castle window in Legnica, gazing out into the gray morning. At 45, he had seen many wars. He had fought the Prussians, clashed with German princes. A devout Christian, he had built monasteries and done everything in his power to protect his people. But the news coming from the east was different. Had burned, Russian cities lay in ruins. Kiev, once home to 50,000 people, now had only 200 houses standing. This was unlike any war he knew. Meanwhile, 500 kilometers to the southeast, King IV of Hungary shared similar fears. The talented 35-year-old king faced a kingdom under threat. He had accepted Cuman nomads fleeing the Mongols. Perhaps their light cavalry could help. But his people didn't trust these foreigners. Riots erupted in the streets of Pest. The Cuman Khan was murdered even while under the king's personal protection. The Cumans fled south, had lost valuable warriors precisely when he needed them most. Neither king knew that the plans determining their fates had already been laid. Subutai, the master of war east of the Carpathians, a 66-year-old man, was planning war. Subutai had grown so heavy that he had to be carried to battlefields in a wagon, but his mind was as sharp as it had been at 14 when he first went to war. He was born the son of a blacksmith. He had no noble background, but the Mongol army operated on a system where results mattered, not bloodlines. At 22, he commanded independent units. At 30, he became one of Genghis Khan's war dogs. Now he held the title of history's greatest conqueror in terms of territory: 30 nations, 65 victories, and as he aged, his experience only deepened. Sitting by the fire, studying maps, his commanders listened to the plan. Hungary is the door, Subutai said. But if we attack directly, the Poles, Germans, and Bohemians might unite. We cannot take that risk. The plan was brilliantly simple. Split the armies into. The main force under Batu Khan would enter Hungary. A smaller force under Bader and Kaidu would sweep through Poland, preventing reinforcements from reaching Hungary. 2 armies, 500 kilometers apart, would attack within the same week. This would be possible without radio or telegraph, only mounted messengers and predetermined schedules. Such coordination seemed nearly impossible in that age, but the Mongols had learned to make the impossible possible. 2 worlds collide to understand the Mongol and European armies. We must place them side by side. European armies operated on a feudal system. When a duke or king issued a call to war, each lord brought his own soldiers. Knights were trained from childhood in the art of war, but for individual heroism. Each knight thought of his own personal glory. On the battlefield, commanders fought at the front, engaging the enemy hand to hand. Honor, courage, the code of chivalry. These were valuable but also made them predictable. Knights wore heavy armor encased head to toe in metal plates, mounted on massive war horses. When a knight fell, he could barely move under that weight. Most soldiers were peasants, poorly trained men, some holding weapons for the first time in battle. The Mongol army was built on an entirely different philosophy. Every warrior was a professional. As children, they learned to ride, shoot, maintain discipline. The army was organized in a decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Each unit had a commander who reported to the next level up. They moved with choreographic precision. Each Mongol warrior brought 3-4 horses. This meant switching to a fresh mount when one tired. They could travel 100 kilometers per day, a speed unimaginable to Europeans. They wore light armor, moved quickly. Their weapons were composite bows, special-made bows that could pierce armor from 200 meters while galloping on horseback. But most importantly, the Mongols had mastered tactical flexibility, feigned retreats to lure enemies into ambushes, smoke bombs to cut visibility, coordinated flank maneuvers, siege engines, massive catapults operated by Chinese engineers, and psychological warfare. Before conquering a city, the Mongols spread tales of terror, stories of entire populations massacred, mountains of corpses. These weren't exaggerations. They were promises. April 9th, 1241. Blood at Legnica. That morning, when Duke Henry marched out of Legnica's gates with his 30,000-man army, the sky was heavy. As they departed, a stone fell from the church, nearly striking the Duke. The crowd saw this as a bad omen, but there was no turning back. Henry's army was impressive. Poland's finest knights, the Teutonic Knights, who had made their name fighting Baltic pagans, a small but elite contingent of Knights Templar from France, Moravian forces, German gold miners. This was the best warriors Europe could offer. 10 kilometers away, near the village of Legnica Pol, the Mongols waited. Kaidu and Bader had deployed with 20,000 men. To European eyes, the Mongol army looked small, even defenseless, light cavalry on small horses, silk and leather armor, strange curved bows. They seemed easily defeatable by a European heavy cavalry charge. The battle began with the Mongol vanguard, the Ögedei advancing, fast, light cavalry. They fired a few volleys of arrows at the European lines. Then they turned, fled. In panic, they raced eastward. Polish knights' blood boiled. The enemy was running. Honor, glory, victory. Before Henry could give orders, the knights spurred their horses forward. They left the infantry behind, broke formation, and thundered after the fleeing Mongols. They pursued for several kilometers. Their horses began to tire. Heavy war horses were bred for short charges, not long chases. Then suddenly the Ögedei wheeled around. From all directions, hills, trees, hidden positions, the main Mongol force appeared. And then came the smoke. The Mongols fired smoke bombs using chemical mixtures learned from China. Dense, choking clouds covered the battlefield. European chronicles thought it was sorcery, but it was advanced technology. Inside the smoke, Polish knights couldn't see beyond a few meters. They heard their own ragged breathing, the screams of wounded horses. Then arrows began coming from every direction. Mongol bows could fire 10-12 arrows per minute. Each warrior carried multiple quivers with 60 arrows each. Some arrows had broad heads designed to kill horses. Some had narrow armor-piercing points. Some whistled in flight designed purely to create terror. Armor became metal coffins rather than protection. Horses collapsed, throwing riders to the ground. Knights in full plate armor could barely move on the ground. Mongol light cavalry moved in, dismounted, and finished the warriors with daggers and axes, finding gaps in the armor. The infantry divisions watched in horror from behind. When the smoke cleared, Europe's knightly elite lay crushed in the dirt. But the battle wasn't over. Mongol heavy cavalry elites riding larger horses, carrying spears and swords, now attacked the exposed infantry. Bavarian gold miners, hard men who had spent their lives swinging picks underground, resisted fiercely, but they were eventually crushed. Moravian forces, Polish units, one by one, they were destroyed. Duke Henry, seeing his army collapsing around him, tried to escape. He rode toward Legnica with a small retinue, but you cannot outrun the world's fastest horseman. Mongol light cavalry caught him, dragged him from his horse, and beheaded him on the spot. After the battle, the Mongols followed a tradition. They filled 9 sacks with ears cut from the dead, a horrifying but effective way to count their kills. Each sack contained over 2,000 ears, at least 18,000, perhaps 25,000 minus 30,000 Europeans had been killed of the Templar Knights contingent. Only 3 brother knights, 2 sergeants, and 500 support personnel survived. The Teutonic Knights were almost completely annihilated. Mongol losses, perhaps a few hundred. Their perfect execution of the feigned retreat tactic, superior mobility, and coordinated tactics had delivered one of history's most one-sided victories. But April 9th wasn't over yet. April 11th, 1241, apocalypse at Mohi. Around the same time, 500 kilometers southeast, King IV had assembled an impressive army of 100,000 men near the river at a place called Mohi. This was one of the largest armies Hungary had ever gathered. Hungarian knights, Templars, Croatian and Dalmatian forces, German settlers. They outnumbered the Mongols, perhaps 80,000 against 100,000. On the west bank of the river, they built a fortified camp with wagons. They controlled the bridge crossing the only open route for Mongol attack. Thought he had chosen his terrain well. On the night of April 10th, a small Mongol force approached the bridge. Hungarian crossbowmen equipped with powerful armor-piercing crossbows opened fire. The first Mongol assault was bloodily repulsed, with Thomas of Split writing that the Hungarians cut down a great many of them and pushed the rest back over the bridge, causing them to be drowned in the river. Word of victory spread through the camp. They had stopped the dreaded Mongols. But Subutai wanted exactly this. While the Hungarians celebrated, under cover of darkness, Mongol engineers built a temporary pontoon bridge several kilometers downstream, a technique they had perfected during Chinese campaigns. It was assembled with expert efficiency. At dawn on April 11th, two things happened simultaneously. First, at the main bridge, the Mongols brought up siege engines, massive catapults. The Hungarians watched in confusion what were siege engines doing in a field battle. Then the bombardment began. Stones weighing hundreds of pounds crashed into the packed formations of Hungarian crossbowmen at the bridgehead. Men were crushed. Survivors fled in panic. With the approach cleared, Mongol heavy cavalry under Ögedei Khan and Prince Shaban charged across the bridge. Thousands of armored warriors thundered across the wooden planks, shaking under their horses' hooves. That's when the second blow fell. Subutai's force, having crossed the pontoon bridge downstream, appeared behind the Hungarian army. The Hungarians were trapped between two Mongol forces. The battle turned into a desperate struggle. Hungarian knights charged Mongol formations repeatedly. Duke Kalaman's brother led charge after charge until he received mortal wounds. Archbishop Ugrin, who as a clergyman was forbidden to shed blood with bladed weapons and thus used a mace, fought until he was killed. For a time, the outcome seemed uncertain, but Ögedei Khan's personal bodyguards took heavy casualties. Senior officer Bakatu was killed. The Mongols were bleeding, but Subutai had seen this before. He ordered the encirclement tightened the Tuluma, the crescent formation. They surrounded the enemy forces like a closing fist. Mongol horse archers circled the Hungarian formations, raining arrows into the packed masses of men. It was impossible to miss. The air filled with screams, the clash of metal, the sound of arrows striking flesh. Some accounts mention the Mongols using early rockets, gunpowder weapons that shrieked through the air, leaving trails of fire and smoke. This is debated among historians, but the effectiveness of the Mongol assault is not. Then Subutai displayed his genius once more. He deliberately left a gap in the Mongol encirclement, an apparent escape route westward, toward the city of Pest. Exhausted and terrified Hungarian soldiers saw it and abandoned their formations, dropped their weapons, thinking only of escape. This was the oldest trick in Mongol tactics. The Hungarians fell for it completely. As they began flowing through the gap in disorder and chaos, Mongol light cavalry gave pursuit on fresh, fast horses. While Hungarian war horses were exhausted from hours of battle, they were rested. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The Mongols rode alongside the fleeing Hungarians, systematically shooting them down. Armored knights were too heavy to run, too exhausted to fight. Infantry were crushed. The pursuit continued for kilometers. Contemporary historian Thomas Spalato, who interviewed survivors, wrote that the retreat route was so filled with corpses that the ground appeared red with blood. The death toll at Mohi was catastrophic. Conservative estimates say 10,000, but most modern historians believe the true number was 40,000 minus 60,000. King barely escaped with a handful of men. His gravely wounded brother Kalaman died shortly after. Archbishop Ugrin, 3 bishops were killed. Most of Hungary's noble leadership was gone. Mongol losses? Unusually high due to the fierce resistance at the bridge, perhaps several thousand. But even accepting the highest estimate, the kill ratio was 15-1 in the Mongols' favor. 3 days that shook a continent. Now grasp the meaning of these numbers. 25,000 minus 30,000 Poles and allies at Legnica on April 9th, 40,000 minus 60,000 Hungarians at Mohi on April 11th. In 3 days, 500 kilometers apart, operating as two separate armies, the Mongols had killed 65,000 minus 90,000 European soldiers. And there was no radio, no telegraph, only pre-made plans, mounted messengers, and Subutai's genius. Human history had never seen such coordination. The terror was just beginning. After Mohi, the Hungarians had no organized resistance left. The Mongol army split into smaller forces and began systematically devastating Hungary, village by village, town by town they advanced. Surrender meant slavery. Resistance meant death, not a quick death. Roger of Apulia, a monk who survived the occupation, wrote of what he witnessed in his work Carmen Miserabile. Mass killings, entire populations gathered into churches and burned alive. Systematic rape, children enslaved, city leaders captured and tortured to death before their people. Sometimes they would promise mercy if a city surrendered, then massacre everyone anyway and ensure word spread so future cities would be too terrified to resist. Hungary's population, approximately 2 million before the invasion, lost 15%, 25%, 300,000, 500,000 dead. Settlements that had stood for centuries became ash. The countryside was so devastated that massive immigration from Germany was needed to repopulate the lands. Europe watched in absolute horror. Messages reached Vienna, Prague, Paris, Rome. Pope Gregory IX called for a crusade against the Mongols. The response was silence. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick was in his own political war with the Pope. German princes were busy with their own rivalries. France had no interest in dying for Hungary. Europe's cultural richness was also its greatest weakness. They couldn't unite. King Wenceslaus of Bohemia's 50,000-man army was only a day's march from Duke Henry at Legnica. If they had united, they might have had a chance, but they didn't unite, and Henry's army was destroyed. In the summer and autumn of 1241, Batu and Subutai planned the next phase. Austria, the Holy Roman Empire, Italy. Subutai was developing strategies for crossing the Alps in winter. He would descend into the Po Valley and sweep through northern Italy, Venice, Milan, Genoa, then France, then the Iberian Peninsula. There was no reason to believe the Mongols could be stopped. Every European army they'd faced had been destroyed. Their siege technology could break any castle. Their mobility allowed them to mass overwhelming force at any point. Europe was a collection of rival kingdoms that hated each other. The conquest of Western Europe seemed inevitable. Then, on December 11, 1241, something happened that had nothing to do with military power or tactics. The great Ögedei, who ruled the Mongol Empire from Karakorum, died. He was a legendary drinker, perhaps alcohol poisoning, perhaps natural causes. Sources vary. But his death triggered the iron law Genghis Khan had established. Upon the death of the great Khan, all blood princes must return to Mongolia to attend the Kurultai to elect the new Khan. Batu was Genghis Khan's grandson. His attendance was mandatory. Subutai reminded him of the law. In early 1242, the Mongol armies withdrew from Hungary, east across the Carpathians and Ukrainian steppes, back to Mongolia. Within weeks, the army that had terrorized Europe simply vanished. The immediate crisis was over, but the wounds remained. What happened next? King IV spent the remaining 30 years of his life rebuilding. In 1240, Hungary had only about 10 stone castles, most near the Austrian border. By his death in 1270, approximately 100 stone castles had been built, a network of defensive points to slow future invasions. He reformed his army, emphasizing archers and fortifications over cavalry charges. He encouraged German immigration to resettle devastated areas. The Mongols returned in 1259 and 1285, but these were raiding expeditions rather than conquest campaigns. Hungary's new castles, reformed army, and the Mongols' own internal divisions made these later invasions far less successful. The psychological impact on Europe was profound. The myth of knightly invincibility was shattered. Military theorists began studying Mongol methods, but truly understanding these lessons took centuries. In Poland, April 9th is remembered as the day knights sacrificed themselves. Hungarians commemorate Mohi as a national tragedy. The Mongols view these campaigns as just another successful operation in their long series of conquests. Military historians see these battles differently. The perfect example of the difference between competent command and truly exceptional command. Duke Henry was a good commander. He was experienced, brave, his soldiers were loyal to him, But Kaidu and Bader manipulated him step by step, feigned retreat, smoke, ambush. Henry did everything he should have, but he faced an enemy with 40 years of professional experience. King was even more impressive. He chose his strategic position well, controlled the river crossing, had numerical superiority, organized his army well. But Subutai had thought of everything, could think of and gone beyond: night bridge construction, tactical use of siege engines, the deliberate escape route. These advantages were systematically neutralized. In modern military academies, the Battle of Mohi is still in the curriculum. Double envelopment, crescent maneuver, how tactical superiority defeats strategic numbers. These are written in textbooks. Subutai's plans, 700 years before the radio age, demonstrate how to conduct coordinated multi-front operations. What if the Mongols hadn't turned back? What if questions in history are dangerous? But this one is truly worth considering. In early 1242, when the Mongols left Europe, there was no military obstacle ahead of them. Vienna was defenseless. The Holy Roman Empire was fragmented. Frederick and the Pope at war with each other. France was powerful but had refused to help Hungary. It was doubtful they'd be prepared to defend their own territory. Italy? Wealthy city-states, but no unified command. Each city thought of its own interests. Mongol siege technology could systematically demolish medieval walls. Historian John Mann writes, there is no reason to believe that Mongol armies would have faced real military resistance until they reached the Atlantic. Imagine it: Venice falling, its libraries burned, Milan's silk workshops turning to ash, the Pope fleeing Rome, perhaps killed, Paris under siege, Canterbury Cathedral razed, Oxford and Cambridge universities destroyed while still under construction. Is this exaggeration? No. Remember what happened to Kiev, a population that fell from 50,000 to 200 houses. The Mongols had done this to hundreds of cities. European cities would have received no different treatment. But it's not just destruction, cultural loss. In the 1240s, Europe was centuries before the Renaissance. Ancient Greek and Roman texts were stored in monasteries, copied by monks. Countless works existed in single copies. If the Mongol invasion had burned these libraries, works by Plato, Aristotle, Virgil could have been lost. They might have survived in the Islamic world, but direct European access would have been gone. Universities were just being established: Paris, Oxford, Bologna. These institutions might not have survived under Mongol advance. The Western intellectual tradition could have taken a different path, perhaps never emerged at all. The masterpieces of Gothic architecture, Chartres, Notre Dame, Westminster, were being newly built or planned in the mid-1200s. If they had been destroyed, an entire architectural era might have been irreversibly lost. And perhaps most importantly, Europe's mosaic of independent kingdoms could have been flattened under Mongol domination. The Mongols allowed local rulers in conquered territories, but subordinate to the Khan. They'd pay tribute, send soldiers, take orders. European autonomy could have been gradually integrated into the Mongol system. This is what happened to the Russian principalities. From 1242 for 2.5 centuries, Russia was under the dominion of the Golden Horde. Princes ruled with Mongol approval. This period deeply influenced Russian culture, politics, even language. A similar scenario was possible for Europe. Of course, the Mongols couldn't last forever. Empires rise and fall, but 2 or 3 centuries of Mongol domination could have changed the course of European history. The Renaissance might not have come. The age of exploration might not have happened. The Industrial Revolution might have occurred somewhere else at another time. The world today could be unrecognizably different. But these things didn't happen because one man, thousands of kilometers away, drank too much and died. After returning from the campaign, Subutai quietly faded from view. Historical records are scarce. Some sources say he died in 1248. Others say later. There was no grand funeral like Genghis Khan's, no lasting impact on the empire like Batu Khan's. Just a 68-year-old man who returned to his camp, perhaps watched his grandchildren, and died. But this man had changed the world like no one else ever had. He had conquered 30 million square kilometers, an area larger than the visible surface of the moon. 30 different countries, 65 major battles, victory in nearly all. He had conquered the Russian principalities, Central Asia, part of the Middle East, half of China, Eastern Europe. And while planning his next steps after conquering Western Europe, a drinking accident changed the course of history. Subutai's grave, if it exists, is unknown. He has no monument, No grand plazas with his statue. In the West, his name is unheard, but in modern Mongolia, he hasn't been forgotten. Military museums in Ulaanbaatar have. His models, his tactics are still studied. His name is synonymous with master of war, and if you look carefully, you can see his traces everywhere in the world. Russia's complex relationship with Europe, remnants of 2 centuries of Mongol influence. Eastern Europe's defensive architecture, hundreds of castles built after Mongol invasions, sections in military theory books about double envelopment, crescent formation, feigned retreat, and of course the fact that in 1241 history didn't go down an alternate path, the survival of Western civilization, the occurrence of the Renaissance, Columbus setting sail, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the modern world. Perhaps these would have happened anyway, in different ways, in different places. Whether history is inevitable or contingent, this debate continues. But the winter of 1241 to 1242 was a turning point in history, and one man's death allowed millions to live. A thought before sleep as you lie in bed, feeling your eyelids grow heavy. Think about this. 800 years ago tonight, somewhere a Polish knight was drifting to sleep thinking about tomorrow's battle. A Hungarian peasant was shivering by the army camp's fire, wondering what would happen. A Mongol warrior was curled beside his horse, making plans while the enemy was hundreds of kilometers away. They couldn't have been thinking about this night. They couldn't see the future. They couldn't know their fates would determine whether you'd be living in your world. But they were there. They sweated, feared, fought, died, and their lives, along with millions of others, determined the course of history. Now you're lying here, safe, comfortable, centuries away from the noise of war, but their echoes are with you. Their choices created your world. The wheels of history turn. Great powers rise and fall. Fates change with a sword stroke or a Khan's death. And you, as you drift to sleep tonight, are a link in an infinite chain of coincidences coming from a past, reaching toward a future. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Tomorrow the sun will rise again. Europe will still stand. Life will continue. But for one night, remember those dark spring days, the death hours at Legnica, the blood at Mohi, the Europe that stood at the threshold of an empire and then was spared, and be grateful that history turned back from that path. Good night. Sleep well. The world is still turning, and you are safe.